Every child's grief is unique. There are some common themes that are experienced by children and youth who are grieving the dying or death of somebody close to them. These can be categorized into what we can call the 4 C's. Did I cause it? Can I catch it? Can I cure it? And who's going to take care of me? And one of the reasons it's so important for educators to check in with kids about these things is because just as much as adults, and particularly parents, caregivers, want to protect kids in their lives, kids also want to protect the caregivers in their lives. Which is why I found pretty quickly into my nursing practice and counseling practice that kids had so many unmet informational needs where they were wondering about these 4 C's, but not asking their caregivers about them at all. And so if educators can check in and explore these with kids, they may be the first person who's ever done so. So in terms of the first one, did I cause it? One way for educators to be able to broach this with kids is to say, you know, a lot of kids that I've known who've been in this situation have thought that maybe they were responsible in some way for the illness or the death. And I'm wondering if this is something that you've ever thought about before. One of the little guys I was working with, it turned out that what he thought was that Dad had yelled at him so much to clean up his room, and he didn't clean up his room very quickly. Dad eventually got throat cancer, and this little guy had put pieces together that didn't belong together, and the story that he narrated for himself was that Dad got throat cancer from yelling at him to clean up his room. I've worked with other kids who have come up with other stories. Teenagers will often come up with more complex stories. So some teenagers will put things together such as, well, you know, I caused my mom a lot of stress, and stress lowers the immune response. And I know that if you've got a lower immune response, you might be more likely to get a serious illness. And that's what happened to my mom. So it was my fault for causing her stress. And sometimes, such as the yelling to clean up the room, we're going to be able to debunk that really easily with kids. But some of the things that they come up with, we might not be able to debunk as easily. But there's also the important piece of just being able to wonder about some of the unanswerables, some of the things that we don't know the answers to. We can wonder with kids, and that's much better than them wondering alone about it. And then there's the, can I catch this? And the root of that is often kids thinking that the illnesses that people commonly get sick with or die from are the same as the ones that spread through the classroom. So I get sick, I pass it on to my best friend, he passes it on to his brother. And so often I find in our society, when a parent or a sibling gets a serious illness, we're not calling it by the name. Often family members think it's too hard for the kid. So instead of saying cancer, I'm just going to say mummy's sick, mummy's sick. And so young children have no way to differentiate that sickness from the type that spreads around the classroom. And that's why it's important to be able to let kids know, you know, the one thing with your mom's illness or her cancer is that it's not something that you can get from her. You can hug her, you can kiss her, you know, you're not going to get cancer from her. And we just want to make sure you know that. Or you can just ask them and be like, you know, I'm wondering, have you ever thought that you might be able to get this illness from your mom? I'd like to talk to you about that. Can I cure it? And kids tend to be, as you guys know, very egocentric beings. They often think if anything good happens around them, it was their fault, and if anything bad happens around them, it was their fault too. And that's often what we call magical thinking, this idea that if I think something, I can actually make it happen. One example of a little guy thinking that maybe he could have cured this was an 8-year-old who I worked with, who his sister was diagnosed with leukemia. He made a private pact with a higher power that nobody in his family even knew that he had, saying that if you save my sister, I'll never fight with her again. And of course he fought with his little sister again. And unfortunately, eventually she did relapse and die from her illness. And so this little guy was totally convinced that it was his fault because he fought with her, she died from her illness. And we didn't find this out until months after her death. And just being able to find that out and reassure him that that wasn't the case made such a difference in this little guy's grieving process. And then the 4th C is, who's going to take care of me? And if a child has a parent who's seriously ill or a parent or caregiver who has died, most children will automatically worry about the other parent or caregiver if they have another one. And that's where The way we can talk to kids about this is, again, saying, you know, a lot of kids will worry that maybe this will happen again, or maybe that this will happen to their other caregiver too. And I'm wondering if that's anything that you've ever worried about. And if the kids say, yeah, it is, what we can say to them is, well, you know, as far as I know, your dad's really, really healthy. And there's a really good chance that he's going to be able to take care of you until long after you need him to take care of you, that he'll be very old before he dies and can't take care of you. But we can't promise these kids that nothing is going to happen to their surviving caregiver. So what we can say is, but you know what, if something did happen, there will be somebody to take care of you. Often parents pick somebody that they want to do this if they're both not able to take care of you, if you have two parents in the first place. And this is where, if kids are open to it, we can say, you know, I think this is a really important conversation for you to be having at home too. And I'm wondering if it's okay if I call your dad and let him know that we've talked about some of these things and encourage him to have this conversation with you at home. And if the child is open to it, great. And if the child says, no, I'd really rather you not, that's okay too. As long as we're not concerned about their safety, we want to respect their privacy. So those are the 4 C's that many children and youth are concerned about. But if a family member has a serious illness or is dying and we know about it, then there's also some practical considerations we should check in with kids about. Do they want to be there at the time of death? Is that their hope? We can't always promise that that can happen, but if the family and the child want that, we can facilitate that happening to the best of our ability. But that involves making a plan. And that's where educators, administrators can really shape the story around the death. No, we can't stop that dying from happening, but we can shape the child's story that they're going to carry with them for the rest of their life. And that's incredibly powerful as well.